We are KB and Jasmine, and welcome to Beyond the Silver Screen.
Yeah. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of Christopher Nolan's films. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Batman and existentialism? But trust me, folks, we're about to uncover some pretty wild connections between Nolan's blockbuster movies and some really deep philosophical ideas. We're not just talking popcorn entertainment here. Nolan's films really grapple with some serious questions about the nature of reality, identity, morality, all that good stuff. Ready to have your mind bent a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think what's so fascinating about Nolan is that he manages to weave these complex philosophical concepts into really thrilling and captivating narratives. He doesn't spoon-feed the audience. He presents these big ideas and kind of lets us wrestle with them.
All right, let's jump right in that. I want to start with one of Nolan's early short films, Doodlebug. This thing is only 3 minutes long, but man, it packs a philosophical punch. So you got this guy in this really grimy apartment, and he's obsessively chasing this like bug-like creature. He finally smashes it and boom, turns out it's a smaller version of himself. And then get this, he's immediately crushed by an even larger version of himself. Talk about a freaky cycle.
That Doodlebug scene is such a great entry point, I think, into one of Nolan's recurring themes, this idea of mimetic doubling. And, this idea of these endless cycles of pursuing and being pursued, it's actually a concept that's been explored by the philosopher René Girard, who argued that much of human behavior, particularly rivalry and conflict, stems from this kind of innate tendency to imitate the desires of others.
So it's not just about a bug, it's about human nature. We're all chasing after what other people want, and that leads to all this competition and conflict.
Precisely. And so that unsettling cycle of violence that we see in Doodlebug, it's almost like a microcosm of these larger societal struggles. And this idea of mimetic desire, it pops up again and again in Nolan's later films, from the rival magicians in The Prestige to the escalating conflict between Batman and the Joker.
This is already blowing my mind.
Yeah.
And we're just getting started. Let's move on to following Nolan's first feature film.
Yeah.
We've got this young man, kind of an aimless writer, and he becomes obsessed with this seasoned burglar named Cobb. And he starts copying Cobb's style, his mannerisms, his everything. It's like he wants to become Cobb.
That's mimetic desire in action. It's not just about wanting the same things as someone else. It's about wanting to be them. And following, I think, brilliantly illustrates the dark side of this desire. The young man's fascination with Cobb leads him down this really dangerous path.
Yeah, it's like he's so caught up in imitating Cobb that he loses himself in the process. And isn't there a sense that Cobb is kind of manipulating this, using the young man's desire for his own kind of twisted ends?
Absolutely. Cobb is this master manipulator who understands the power of mimetic desire. He sees that the young man wants what he has, wants to be who he is, and he exploits that. And so it becomes this cautionary tale about how easily our desires can be shaped and manipulated by others.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's talk about The Prestige. This film is like a magic trick itself. With the layers of deception and rivalry, you got these two magicians, Borden and Angier, and they're locked in this deadly competition. And it's not just about outdoing each other with tricks. It's about this obsession, this revenge, this desire to be the best.
And their rivalry is fueled by this concept called internal mediation, another concept from Girard's theory. Essentially, their competition becomes even more intense because they're on equal footing. They're both brilliant magicians vying for the same recognition and acclaim. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing your darkest desires reflected back at you.
And didn't Nolan actually draw inspiration from the real-life rivalry between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison for this film?
He did. And just like Borden and Angier, Tesla and Edison were these brilliant minds driven by this insatiable need to kind of outshine the other, and they often resorted to these ethically questionable tactics in the process. So it's this fascinating case study of how competition can breed these doppelgangers, these mirror images locked in this battle for dominance.
So Nolan's not just making a film about magicians here. He's making a film about the dark side of human ambition, about how the desire for recognition can drive us to these extremes.
Precisely. And it's not just about ambition, I think. It's about this desire to be preferred over others, a concept that Rousseau called amour propre. It's this yearning for validation, for proving our worth, and in extreme cases, it can drive us to these harmful actions.
Wow. I'm starting to see these philosophical threads weaving through all of Nolan's films. So make me rethink everything I thought I knew about these movies. Okay, let's dive into Insomnia. We got Al Pacino playing this detective. And he's battling not only a killer, but also his own insomnia. And the setting, this Alaskan town where the sun never sets, just adds to this whole disorienting vibe.
And Nolan's choice of setting is brilliant. He places Detective Dormer, a character who's already grappling with this past moral compromise. In an environment that exacerbates his inner turmoil, that constant daylight becomes a metaphor for his inability to escape his own demons.
And then you have the murderer, Walter Finch, who brings this whole other layer of moral complexity to the film. He seems to have this kind of nihilistic view of morality, arguing that right and wrong are just social constructs. It's pretty unsettling.
Finch really embodies this concept of moral anti-realism, this belief that there are no objective moral truths. He argues that our ideas of right and wrong are subjective, even illusory. It's a direct challenge to Dormers and our own assumptions about the existence of some absolute moral compass.
It's like Nolan's forcing us to confront the darkness, not just within the characters, but within ourselves, to ask ourselves, what if there is no right answer? What if morality is truly subjective?
Exactly. He's not giving us these easy answers. He's forcing us to wrestle with these uncomfortable questions. And that's where the true power of his filmmaking lies. He's not just entertaining us, he's making us think.
Okay, I'm ready for another dose of mind-bending brilliance. Let's talk about Interstellar. This film takes us on this cosmic journey through wormholes, black holes, and the vastness of space.
Interstellar is a visual and philosophical masterpiece. It tackles this concept of the subjectivity of substance, an idea explored by Hegel. In essence, it suggests that what we perceive as solid and independent, what we call substance, is actually shaped by our knowledge and actions.
Hold on, are you saying that reality is subjective? That it's not as fixed as we think it is?
Precisely. And Interstellar plays with this idea brilliantly. At first, we're led to believe that there's this powerful alien intelligence, these others, who are responsible for the wormhole, but then, boom, Nolan hits us with this mind-blowing twist. The others are actually future humans who have evolved to the point where they can manipulate time and space.
Wait, so the future is influencing the past? Mind officially blown.
And that's where Hegel's concept of retroactive causality comes in. It suggests that actions in the present can actually change the meaning and significance of past events. Think about that scene where Cooper, the protagonist, sends a message to his past self, essentially setting in motion the very events that led him to that point.
Whoa, time travel and existential paradoxes. This is heavy stuff.
It is, but it's also incredibly thought-provoking. Nolan's not just playing with these cool sci-fi concepts. He's challenging our understanding of time causality and our role in shaping our own destinies.
Okay, one more mind-bending adventure to go before we take a break. Let's talk about Memento, a film that explores the fragility of memory and the construction of identity. We follow Leonard Shelby, a man with anterograde amnesia, who's desperately trying to piece together his wife's murder while battling his inability to form new memories.
Memento is such a brilliant exploration of memory and its impact on our sense of self. And the film's fragmented structure, presented in reverse chronological order, mirrors Leonard's own fractured memory, forcing us, the audience, to piece together the truth alongside him.
Yeah, it's like we're living inside his head, experiencing his confusion and frustration firsthand.
Exactly, and this raises these fundamental questions about the nature of personal identity. If our memories are unreliable, if they can be manipulated or even erased, then what does it mean to be the same person over time?
That's a terrifying thought. It's like our entire sense of self is built on this shaky foundation.
And Nolan takes it even further. Remember that moment when Leonard admits to deliberately lying to himself to be happy? He chooses to believe this fabricated reality, even if it's based on this false memory.
It's like he's saying, if reality is just a construct, then I'll construct a reality that I can live with, even if it's a lie.
That's the unsettling truth that Memento confronts us with. It suggests that our identities might be more fluid, more malleable than we'd like to believe, and that even in the face of this overwhelming uncertainty, we have a choice in how we construct our own narratives, our own sense of self.
Wow, that's a powerful idea. Okay, I think my brain needs a break to process all of this. We've covered a lot of ground, but we've only just scratched the surface of the philosophical depths in Nolan's films.
Yeah, we've barely begun to explore the dream-bending world of Inception. But that's a conversation for part 2 of our deep dive.
Listeners, join us for part 2, where we'll be entering the world of Inception and exploring the philosophical questions it raises about the nature of reality consciousness and the power of dreams.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the philosophy of Christopher Nolan. We just finished exploring themes of mimetic desire, moral ambiguity, and the malleability of memory in some of his earlier films. Now get ready to enter the dreamscapes of Inception, where reality itself becomes this fluid and often dangerous playground.
Okay, Inception is one of those movies that just messes with your head in the best way possible. I mean, the idea of planting ideas in people's minds by infiltrating their dreams, it's like mind espionage.
It's a brilliant premise that allows Nolan to explore some really age-old philosophical questions. about the nature of reality perception, the power of the subconscious. One of the core ideas I think that Inception tackles is this thing called the dream argument, a philosophical problem that's been around for centuries.
The dream argument. Okay, and intrigued, but also slightly terrified. What exactly is that?
It basically challenges our certainty about reality. Think about it. If dreams can feel so real, how do we know for sure that we're not dreaming right now? And Inception plays with that possibility, blurring the lines between dreams and waking life so effectively that we start to question everything.
Hold on, you're making me doubt my own existence here. So how do we tell the difference between a dream and reality? In the film, they use those totems, right?
Right, those personal objects with unique properties that help the dream extractors distinguish between dream levels and the real world. But even those totems can be unreliable, as we see with Cobb and his spinning top.
So even if I have like a lucky charm or something, I couldn't be 100% certain I wasn't in a dream. This is starting to feel like a rabbit hole. I'm not sure I want to go down.
That's the point. Nolan wants us to confront the limits of our perception and acknowledge that reality might not be as straightforward as we assume. He's echoing the thoughts of philosophers like Descartes, who famously said, "I think, therefore I am." But Inception shows us that even that fundamental certainty can be shaken within the realm of dreams.
Okay, let's say for a moment that we can't be certain about reality. What then? Does that mean anything goes? Do we just give up trying to understand the world?
Not necessarily. Inception doesn't offer easy answers, but it does suggest that the search for truth and meaning is still important, even within the realm of dreams. The film's central conflict revolves around Cobb's attempts to reconcile with his past, his guilt and his unresolved feelings for his deceased wife, Mal.
It's like his subconscious is waging war against him, using his own memories and emotions as weapons within those dreamscapes.
Exactly, and that's where Inception goes beyond just the philosophical exploration of reality and delves into the psychological and emotional power of dreams. They become this battleground where we confront our deepest fears, desires, and unresolved traumas.
So it's not just about figuring out what's real and what's not. It's about understanding ourselves, the hidden depths of our own minds.
Precisely, and that's one of the key takeaways, I think, from Inception. Dreams can be these incredibly powerful tools for self-discovery, for accessing these hidden parts of our psyche. But it's a double-edged sword. They can also be incredibly deceptive, leading us down these paths of delusion and self-destruction if we're not careful.
Okay, that makes sense. But I have to ask about the ending. That spinning top. Did it topple or not? Are we left in a dream or back in reality? I've been arguing about this with friends ever since I first saw the film.
Ah, the eternal question. Nolan intentionally leaves that ambiguous, inviting us to draw our own conclusions. Some argue that the top's wobble suggests a return to reality, while others believe it's all still a dream.
So, no right answer. It's like Nolan is saying, I've given you the tools, now you decide what's real.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of it. He's not trying to give us this definitive answer. He wants us to keep thinking, to keep questioning, even after the film ends.
Okay, one last thing before we move on. Inception also touches on this idea of simulated reality, which is something we're hearing a lot about these days.
It does, and it ties in nicely with the dream argument and our uncertainty about what's real. Remember that thought experiment by the philosopher Robert Nozick called the experience machine? He imagined this machine that could give you any experience you desired, completely indistinguishable from reality. And the question is, would you choose to plug in and live this simulated life? Even if it meant giving up genuine experiences, relationships, even struggles.
Wow, that's like the Matrix, but with even more existential angst.
Exactly, and Inception doesn't explicitly endorse either choice, but it does raise these ethical and existential questions. It makes us think about what truly matters in life, about the value of authenticity, and whether a simulated existence, no matter how blissful, could ever truly satisfy our deepest human needs.
Okay, now my head is really spinning. I think I need a moment to just process all these mind-blowing concepts.
I think that's a good idea. We've explored some pretty profound territory with Inception, questioning the very nature of reality and the power of our own minds.
Listeners, stick with us as we continue our deep dives in Part 3. We'll be connecting all these mind-bending ideas from Nolan's films to the real world and exploring what they mean for us, for our understanding of ourselves, and for the choices we make every day.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring the philosophical layers of Christopher Nolan's films, from mimetic desire and moral dilemmas to the very nature of reality itself. It's been a wild ride. It really has, and it's amazing how Nolan can take these complex philosophical concepts and weave them so seamlessly into these blockbuster narratives. He doesn't just entertain us, he makes us think, question, and re-examine our own perceptions of the world.
Okay, so we've unpacked all these heady ideas, but now I'm wondering, so what? What does all this mean for us, the everyday folks navigating the real world?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And I think Nolan's films, while fantastical and entertaining, offer some valuable insights into the human condition. One key takeaway for me is the power of mimetic desire. We see it play out in Following the Prestige, and even in the subtle ways Cobb's subconscious manipulates his team in Inception. It's a reminder that we are constantly influenced by the desires of others, whether we realize it or not.
It's like that saying, we are the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. But in Nolan's films, it's not just about who we surround ourselves with. It's about who we choose to emulate, who we allow to shape our desires and ambitions.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point, I think. Nolan's films challenge us to be more self-aware, to examine the forces that shape our beliefs and motivations. It's easy to just go through life on autopilot, accepting the narratives we're given, whether it's by society, family, or even our own subconscious.
It's like we're all living in our own version of Memento, piecing together a reality that makes sense to us, even if it's based on incomplete or unreliable information.
Precisely. And so we need to develop those critical thinking skills, those tools for discernment to navigate the complexities of the real world. That includes being aware of our own biases, our tendencies towards self-deception, and those totems we cling to for a sense of security.
So instead of passively accepting the reality we're presented with, we need to be more active, more questioning, more willing to challenge assumptions. Like Cobb and his team in Inception, we need to become skilled at extracting the truth, both within ourselves and in the world around us.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just about uncovering hidden truths or manipulating dreams. It's about understanding the power of narrative, the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we allow others to tell us. Remember Leonard in Memento deliberately choosing to believe a fabricated reality. It's a reminder that we have a choice in how we construct our own narratives, even if it means confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
It's both empowering and a little terrifying to realize how much control we actually have over shaping our own realities. And it's not about magical thinking or time travel. It's about making conscious choices about what we believe, how we interpret experiences, and the stories we create for ourselves.
And that's where the ethical dimension comes into play, I think. Nolan's films constantly challenge us to consider the consequences of our choices, both for ourselves and for others. Whether it's Dormer's moral compromises in Insomnia or the potential for manipulation and harm in Inception, we're forced to confront the ethical dilemmas inherent in our actions.
I'm starting to see how these seemingly fantastical films actually offer a profound reflection on the human condition. It's not just about escapism. It's about grappling with real-world issues of identity, morality, and the choices we make every day.
And perhaps most importantly, Nolan's films encourage us to embrace ambiguity, to acknowledge that there may not be easy answers or definitive truths. The spinning top at the end of Inception, the unreliable memories in Memento, the shifting realities in Interstellar, all point to a universe that is complex, fluid, and often beyond our complete understanding.
It's like he's saying, don't be afraid to question, to explore, to embrace the mystery. The journey itself is where the true meaning lies.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of wonder, of curiosity, of openness to new possibilities. Even when faced with uncertainty, even when the ground beneath us seems to shift, there's a beauty in that constant exploration, that search for meaning.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. I'm feeling inspired, challenged, and maybe a little more prepared to face the complexities of the real world with a fresh perspective.
I couldn't agree more. Christopher Nolan's films are a testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring relevance of philosophical inquiry.
And listeners, we hope this deep dive has ignited your own curiosity, your own desire to engage with the world in a more thoughtful and inquisitive way. Keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and keep those spinning tops spinning. Until next time, this has been The Deep Dive. Hello, and we are KD and Jasmine. Today, we're really going deep, taking a deep dive into the world of David Lynch, a filmmaker who honestly, truly dances between dreams and darkness.
And you know what makes this dive so fascinating? It's that we're not just looking at his films. No, we're tracing the evolution of his artistic vision all the way back, like all the way back to his childhood. It's like one of those Russian nesting dolls. Just layers upon layers of inspiration and experience that just build upon one another.
So let's peel back those layers. Let's start with his childhood. He's described his childhood as a dream, but not like the sweet whimsical kind. It's more like a dream with those unsettling undercurrents, those hints of darkness kind of lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. And it's not just some kind of abstract concept either. Lynch actually points to specific events, like moving around a lot as a kid, seeing the contrast between those like picture-perfect small towns, those picture-perfect towns, and then the darker realities underneath. Those early experiences really infused his work with this sense of duality.
Almost like those perfectly manicured lawns in his films,
Yeah.
right? At first they seem so idyllic, but there's always that sense that something sinister is hidden, just out of sight.
It's like he's trying to tell us something. Like, look closer, things aren't always what they seem. And this fascination with those hidden depths, it even shows up in his early fascination with textures. He talks about this aversion to vinyl, like this constant search for other, tactile experiences. He even experimented with removing the fur from a dead mouse.
Wait, hold on. Removing fur from a mouse?
Oh yeah, he did. Apparently he used hair remover. And what's really striking is that he describes the result as beautiful. It really speaks to this idea that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places, even unsettling places.
That's classic Lynch. Finding the extraordinary within the ordinary, the beautiful within the grotesque. It's like his painting, I See Myself, with those two figures, one light, one dark, and skeletal, representing this inherent duality in human nature. It's a theme we see echoed throughout his work.
Absolutely. It's like those figures are constantly battling for dominance, both within ourselves and within the world around us. And this idea of internal struggle is amplified when we look at the influence of place, like the influence of place on Lynch's art. He talks about Philadelphia with that gritty industrial landscape as a catalyst for his creativity. The smells, the sounds, the atmosphere, it all fed into his unique artistic vision.
But isn't it interesting how he later moves to Los Angeles? A city that, on the surface, seems so different from Philadelphia, and yet, even in that sprawling metropolis, he finds inspiration. He even talks about sensing these gusts of wind from the golden age of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's like he's drawn to these pockets of history, these remnants of bygone eras, and it's in Los Angeles at the American Film Institute where Eraserhead really starts to take shape.
It's fascinating because it began as this unusual blend of painting, sculpture, and film. I mean, this wasn't just some student film. It was a statement. You know what I mean? And it was so unconventional that it even caught the attention of those AFI executives. And here's where things get really interesting. Lynch was so dedicated to this vision, to his vision, that he was actually living in the AFI stables during production. Talk about commitment.
It really shows this incredible resourcefulness, this willingness to do whatever it takes to bring his vision to life. And this DIY spirit extends to his collaboration with Alan Splett, the sound designer. They spent months crafting the film's unsettling soundscapes, even using sounds from a previous project, 6 Men Getting Sick.
So even at this early stage, he was already recycling and reimagining his work, weaving these threads of sound and vision together. And speaking of weaving, the meticulous detail in Eraserhead is mind-blowing. They broke down Jack Nance's movements into these almost animation-like steps. It's incredible how much thought and care went into every single frame.
It really speaks to Lynch's control as a filmmaker. He's not just capturing images, he's crafting a complete sensory experience. And years later, when he finally saw a new print of Eraserhead, he declared it a perfect film. That's a bold statement coming from a director known for his constant evolution.
Yeah, it really is. It's like he's acknowledging that even with all of his future work, Eraserhead still holds this special place as this pure, unfiltered expression of his early vision.
Right. And the success, well, it paved the way for his entry into Hollywood. He was approached to direct The Elephant Man, a film that on the surface might seem so different from the surreal world of Eraserhead.
But even in a more traditional narrative like The Elephant Man, we still see those signature Lynchy elements. Take the makeup effects for John Hurt, for example. He was initially tasked with creating them, but the process turned out to be way more challenging and, as he describes it, humiliating than he initially anticipated.
It's almost as if he was forced to confront the limitations of his own skills, which can be a humbling experience for any artist. Fortunately, Mel Brooks, the producer, recognized Lynch's true strength lay in directing, not makeup artistry. He brought in Chris Tucker, a master of prosthetics, and really championed Lynch throughout the production.
That kind of support from someone like Mel Brooks must have been invaluable. especially for a director still relatively new to Hollywood.
Absolutely. I mean, it speaks volumes about Lynch's talent and Brooks's ability to see beyond the surface and just recognize that raw potential. But it wasn't all smooth sailing in Hollywood. Lynch has spoken about his frustration with the studio system, especially regarding Dune. He felt pressure to shorten the film, which ultimately compromised his original vision.
Yeah, that tension between artistic vision and commercial pressures seems to be a recurring theme in his career. It's like this constant push and pull between staying true to his unique voice
Yeah.
and navigating those demands of the industry.
And you know where that tension is more apparent? Blue Velvet, where he really just dives headfirst into the dark underbelly of American suburbia. And it's fascinating how certain elements, like the use of Roy Orbison's In Dreams, weren't originally planned, but they ended up becoming so integral, like, to the film's overall meaning.
It's like he's so open to these happy accidents, these moments of serendipity that can really elevate a film beyond what was initially conceived. It speaks to his intuitive approach to filmmaking.
Exactly. He trusts his instincts, his gut feeling for what feels right. Like in the scene where Dean Stockwell's character is lip-syncing to In Dreams, Dennis Hopper was supposed to be inhaling helium, but during rehearsal, Stockwell unexpectedly started singing along, and Hopper, in character, was genuinely moved. Lynch saw the magic of that unscripted moment and kept it in the film.
That's such a great example of how those spontaneous moments, those deviations from the script, can often reveal something deeper, something more authentic.
It's about recognizing the power of those happy accidents and having the confidence to incorporate them into the larger tapestry of the film.
And of course, we can't talk about Blue Velvet without discussing Isabella Rossellini. Her incredible performance as Dorothy Valance. She brings such depth and vulnerability to a character that honestly could have easily been one-dimensional.
Rossellini has even said that she saw Dorothy as a symbol of complex female experience, that she was challenging those stereotypical notions of victims and victimhood. And it's important to note that Lynch, despite his reputation for creating disturbing imagery, has immense respect for his actors, giving them the space to explore and embody their characters in their own unique way.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
He's not just exploiting those darker elements for shock value. He's exploring them with a depth and sensitivity that's often overlooked.
And this exploration of the darkness, the hidden desires and anxieties lurking beneath the surface of everyday life, it takes an even more surreal turn in his next project, Twin Peaks.
A project that began with a simple image, a body washing up on the shore of a lake.
Exactly. And from that single image, Lynch and his co-creator, Mark Frost, built this entire world, this town called Twin Peaks that is both familiar and deeply unsettling. It was such a groundbreaking show for its time, exploring that darker side of human nature with a blend of surrealism and soap opera that really captivated audiences worldwide.
And like Blue Velvet, certain elements of Twin Peaks just emerged organically during filming. For example, Killer Bob wasn't originally in the script. Lynch saw the reflection of Frank Silva, a set dresser, in a mirror and had this aha moment. He knew right then that Silva had to be in the show, and so Killer Bob was born.
And then there's the man from another place, another character that seems to have just emerged from Lynch's subconscious. He'd met the actor, Michael J. Anderson, years earlier and knew that he'd be perfect for something. And wouldn't you know it, the scene where the man from another place first appears, that iconic red room scene, came to Lynch while he was just leaning against a warm car in a parking lot.
These stories are incredible. It's like he's just constantly attuned to these subconscious frequencies, these flashes of inspiration that most of us would probably just dismiss as random thoughts.
It really speaks to his openness to the unknown, to letting go of control and allowing those unexpected moments to shape his creative process.
And that's something we can all learn from, isn't it? To be more receptive to those unexpected flashes of inspiration, those seemingly random occurrences that might actually hold the key to unlocking something deeper within ourselves.
That's a great point to end on, don't you think? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here in this first part of our dive, but there's just so much more to explore. Join us in part 2, where we'll delve deeper into Lynch's later films, his forays into music and photography, and his evolving relationship with success and fame.
Until then, keep those minds open and those eyes peeled for the unexpected. You never know where those Lynchian inspirations might be lurking.
Welcome back. I'm so eager to pick up where we left off, especially with Twin Peaks. Fire Walk with Me. Man, that film really stirred the pot, Some people saw it as a betrayal of the whole series, Too dark, way too raw. But then others consider it like a masterpiece. A masterpiece that finally gives us the, missing piece of Laura Palmer's story.
It's like he took all those expectations from the series, all that like quirky charm and small town mystery, and just flipped it on its head. Instead of just giving the fans exactly what they wanted, he doubled down on the darkness, exploring that trauma of abuse, that psychological torment that Laura had to endure.
And yeah, it's definitely not an easy watch, not by any means, but I think it just speaks to Lynch's, commitment, his commitment to exploring the full spectrum of human experience. Even those aspects that make us uncomfortable, the stuff that we'd honestly rather turn away from.
Yeah, he's not afraid to show us the ugliness, the pain, the things we all try to keep hidden. But even in Fire Walk with Me, even in those moments of like profound darkness, there's this glimmer of hope, this sense of transcendence. Think about that final scene in the Red Room with Laura and the angel. It's like he's trying to tell us that even in the face of just unimaginable suffering, there's still a possibility, a possibility of healing, of finding some kind of peace.
It's a powerful image. It really is. And it kind of speaks to that duality we've been talking about, that constant back and forth between darkness and light, despair and hope. That just runs through all of Lynch's work.
Yeah.
It's what makes his films so challenging, so thought-provoking, and ultimately so rewarding.
So we've seen him tackle the darkness head on in Fire Walk with Me, but then he just shifts gears completely with the straight story. It's almost like an outlier in his filmography, don't you think? This simple, really heartfelt story about an old man traveling across the country on a lawnmower to see his ailing brother. I mean, where's the surrealism? Where's the darkness?
Well, what's remarkable about the straight story is that it shows us something else. It shows us a different side of Lynch's, sensibility, this tenderness, this grace that maybe, just maybe, has been there all along. It just hasn't been so, explicitly in the forefront. It's a film that celebrates the human spirit, the power of simple kindness, and the beauty of connecting with the world.
And he does it with such restraint, such masterful control of the tone, the pacing. I mean, the film moves at this really deliberate pace, almost meditative, mirroring Alvin Straight's journey and allowing the audience to really absorb the emotional weight of the story.
And the casting of Richard Farnsworth as Alvin, well, it's just perfect. He brings this quiet dignity and authenticity to the role, and his performance is just incredibly moving.
It's interesting, too, how The Straight Story was co-written by Mary Sweeney, Lynch's longtime partner, an editor. You can really feel her influence in the film's sensibility. And it speaks to Lynch's openness to collaboration, his willingness to step outside of his comfort zone and just explore different modes of storytelling.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Lynch is often portrayed as this solitary auteur, but a lot of his work is the result of collaborations, of bouncing ideas off others and allowing those interactions to shape the final product.
It's like a jazz ensemble. Everyone's playing their part, riffing off each other, creating something unique, something unexpected in the process. And speaking of collaboration, let's talk about Lost Highway, a film that's kind of a return to that darker, more surreal territory that we associate with Lynch. He actually co-wrote the screenplay with Barry Gifford, a novelist whose work shares that same blend of mystery, dark humor, and psychological unease that we see in Lynch's films. It's like they were just meant to work together.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Lost Highway is this crazy, labyrinthine journey into the subconscious, exploring these huge themes of identity, memory, and just the nature of reality. It's one of those films that defies easy interpretation, encouraging us to just piece together the whole fragmented narrative, and draw our own conclusions.
It's almost as if he's daring us to, keep up with him, to engage with the film on a deeper level, He's not interested in just spoon-feeding us the answers. He trusts us to embrace the mystery and grapple with the film's unsettling implications.
And those unsettling implications are kind of taken to this even more dreamlike extreme in Mulholland Drive. This hypnotic and haunting meditation on Hollywood, on dreams, on nightmares. It's like a love letter to cinema. But at the same time, it deconstructs the myths of Hollywood and exposes that dark underbelly.
And what's so fascinating about both Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive is how he uses these recurring motifs, dreams, electricity, industrial landscapes, the uncanny, to kind of weave a thread through all of his films, creating this interconnected universe where reality and fantasy are constantly blurred.
And those motifs aren't just there for show, They're not just visual flair. They function as metaphors, inviting us to look deeper, look beneath the surface, and really grapple with those deeper meanings embedded within his work.
For example, the baby in Eraserhead. It can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
As a symbol of fear, responsibility, like the anxieties of parenthood, or even the creative process itself.
Exactly. See, Lynch doesn't give us those definitive answers. He invites us to engage with his work on a symbolic level, to find our own interpretations and draw our own conclusions based on our own experiences.
And that openness to interpretation is what makes his films so endlessly fascinating, so rewarding. They're not just stories to be passively consumed, you know what I mean? They're puzzles to be solved, mysteries to be unraveled, and ultimately reflections of our own desires, our fears, and the complexities of being human.
And that exploration, the exploration of the human experience, it isn't confined to his films either. I mean, Lynch is this multifaceted artist. He's delved into music, photography, painting. All these different art forms feed into and inform each other, creating this rich and layered tapestry of artistic expression.
So as we kind of wrap up this second part, I'm honestly struck by just how much ground we've covered.
Yeah.
And yet it still feels like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack,
Yeah.
to analyze, to really contemplate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in part 3, we'll do just that. We'll delve even deeper, exploring Lynch's enduring legacy, his influence on contemporary filmmaking, and his unwavering commitment to artistic integrity.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of David Lynch. We've journeyed through his childhood, explored his artistic evolution, and really just gotten lost in those labyrinthine corridors of his filmography. And now, I think it's time to grapple with the big question: what is it about Lynch's work that continues to resonate, with audiences even decades later?
Yeah, it's a question that kind of lingers, like one of those unsettling drones that underscores so many of his scenes. You know what I mean? I think for one, it's his fearlessness. Lynch just doesn't shy away from those dark corners of human experience. You know what I mean? He kind of confronts us with the uncomfortable, the taboo. And in doing so, he forces us to acknowledge those shadows that are all around us. I mean, within ourselves and in the world,
He doesn't sugarcoat anything either. He gives us those glimpses, those raw, unfiltered glimpses into the abyss. But he does it with this strange beauty, like this poetic sensibility that elevates those dark moments into something transcendent.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, hey, look, this darkness is here. Okay, this darkness exists. And it's a part of who we are, but it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to define us. There's always that glimmer of hope, always that possibility of redemption, even in those darkest places.
And he's a master of atmosphere, isn't he?
Yeah.
He creates these worlds that are familiar, but at the same time, utterly strange, drawing us in with their hypnotic beauty and then unsettling us with those unexpected twists and turns.
Yeah. Think about those images, those iconic images that stay with you, long after the film is over. The red curtains of the Red Room in Twin Peaks, the flickering lamplight in Dorothy Valens' apartment, in Blue Velvet. Or those vast open landscapes of The Straight Story. Those landscapes juxtaposed against that slow, deliberate movement of Alvin's lawnmower. I mean, each image is just so carefully crafted, so rich with symbolism, with meaning.
And you just can't talk about Lynch without talking about the music. Angelo Badalamenti's scores are so much more than just soundtracks. They're like sonic tapestries, like woven into the very fabric of his films.
Their collaboration is something else. It's truly remarkable. Badalamenti has said that Lynch would describe the mood he wanted, the mood for a scene, and sometimes he would even hum a melody. And Badalamenti would just translate that feeling, translate that feeling into music. And it's that intuitive process that creates those scores, those incredibly evocative scores that capture those emotional undercurrents of Lynch's world.
It's like they're just like tapping into some shared subconscious, where words aren't even necessary. They speak this language of feeling, of mood, of pure, raw emotion.
And Lynch's influence, it goes way beyond his films. You can see his fingerprints, on the work of so many other filmmakers, like contemporary filmmakers. From Harmony Korine's that gritty realism to Lars von Trier's psychological thrillers. Even in shows like Stranger Things and Atlanta, you see those echoes of Lynch's willingness to embrace the surreal, the unsettling, the darkly comedic.
He really paved the way for a whole generation of artists who aren't afraid to take risks, to push those boundaries, to just challenge everything, challenge the status quo.
He legitimized a certain kind of filmmaking, the kind that prioritizes atmosphere, mood, ambiguity, all over clear-cut narratives and easy answers, He's given us permission to get lost in the mystery, to embrace the unknown, and just find beauty in the most unexpected places.
And perhaps most importantly, he stayed independent, fiercely independent throughout his entire career. He's never compromised his vision, not for commercial success or anything. He's always just followed his own path. His own path, even when it led him to, some pretty unconventional places.
That's inspiring, that unwavering commitment to artistic integrity.
Yeah.
It really is. It's a testament to the power of just trusting your gut, following your own intuition, your own unique vision, even when everyone is telling you to play it safe, to conform. And that's a legacy that's going to continue to inspire artists, for generations to come.
David Lynch, he's given us so much.
Yeah.
His body of work that is, I don't know, it's just as enigmatic as it is profound, as disturbing as it is beautiful. He's challenged how we see the world, how we see things, expanded our understanding of film, of cinema, and left us with, I don't know, it's like this treasure trove of images, sounds, ideas that will continue to haunt us, to inspire us for, well, probably forever.
I feel grateful. As we reach the end of our deep dive, I feel grateful. Grateful for Lynch's fearlessness, his artistry, and his unwavering commitment, his commitment to exploring all of it, the full spectrum of human experience.
And to everyone listening, I hope you revisit Lynch's films, his other work, his art, photography, everything, and keep those minds open and those senses attuned, to the world around you. You never know. You never know where you might find that next spark of inspiration, that next glimpse, into the heart of the mystery. Until next time, keep diving deep.
We are KB and Jasmine, and welcome to Beyond the Silver Screen.
Yeah. This time we're going to be looking at one of the most exciting and turbulent periods in Hollywood history, the rise of the movie brats. So just picture it, the late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, yeah.
America is grappling with the Vietnam War. The counterculture movement is challenging everything. And then you have Hollywood, which is stuck in its old ways, clinging to a studio system that's rapidly becoming outdated. So that's the scene for today's deep dive.
Yeah, it really was like the perfect storm for something new to happen. You had the old guard, the studio heads who were totally out of touch with what young people wanted.
Right, they wanted something different.
They wanted authenticity and grit. They wanted films that reflected the world they were living in, not the polished, sanitized version that Hollywood had been peddling for decades.
Yeah, and that's where these so-called movie brats come in.
Exactly.
They weren't just making movies, they were shaking things up, breaking rules, and really changing the face of cinema.
Yeah, they were young and hungry filmmakers. They were influenced by European art cinema, and they had this burning desire to tell stories that resonated with their own generation.
And some of them went on to become the biggest names in Hollywood. We're talking
huge names.
Francis Ford, Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas.
Yeah, all names we know and love.
But today we're going to dive deep into their early years, their struggles, their triumphs, and really try to understand their impact on the industry.
I'm excited for this one.
Me too. So let's start with the landscape of Hollywood at the time. We know the old studio system was crumbling. But how did that create an opening for these young rebels to make their mark?
Well, the studios were losing money, plain and simple.
Makes sense.
Their big-budget musicals and historical epics were flopping, while smaller independent films like Bonnie and Clyde and Easy Rider were capturing the zeitgeist and making a ton of money.
Those two films are always mentioned as being catalysts for this new Hollywood movement. What made them so groundbreaking?
Well, they were raw. They were violent, and they were morally ambiguous, which was a far cry from the traditional hero narratives that Hollywood had been churning out for decades.
Right, it was something totally new.
Like Bonnie and Clyde romanticized outlaws and kind of blurred the lines between art film and commercial cinema.
I love that film.
It also used these really innovative editing techniques like jump cuts and slow motion to heighten the violence and create a sense of stylized realism.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the style that was different. These films tackled themes that were relevant to a younger audience. Disillusionment, rebellion, this search for identity in a world that felt increasingly chaotic.
Absolutely. And then Easy Rider took it a step further.
Yeah, Easy Rider was...
It was a road movie, a counterculture anthem that celebrated freedom, individuality, and, let's be honest, use.
It's amazing to think that a low-budget biker film, shot on location with a relatively unknown cast, could have such a profound impact.
It is, but that's the thing about this era. There was a real sense of possibility, this feeling that anything could happen.
Yeah, that must have been exciting to be a part of.
It was the old rules were being thrown out the window, and these young filmmakers were eager to experiment, to push boundaries, and to see how far they could take it.
And they weren't afraid to fight for their vision. right?
Yeah.
We always hear these stories about these epic battles between directors and studio executives.
Oh, absolutely. These were passionate, driven individuals. They believed in their stories, and they weren't going to compromise their artistic integrity.
I can imagine.
They challenged the studio's control over everything, casting, editing, even marketing, basically everything the studios held sacred.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster, but somehow it worked.
Yeah.
These films were not only critically acclaimed, but they were also box office hits.
Yeah, it's a testament to their talent, their tenacity, and maybe a little bit of luck, too. They caught a wave, a cultural shift that was already in motion, and they rode it to success, but it wasn't all smooth sailing.
Let's talk about some of those behind-the-scenes battles.
Yeah.
Thinking specifically about the making of The Godfather. It's considered one of the greatest films of all time.
Absolutely.
But I know it was a notoriously difficult production.
It was Francis Ford Coppola, the director, had to fight tooth and nail for his vision.
Really?
Paramount, the studio, wanted a safe, predictable gangster flick.
I guess that makes sense from their perspective.
Right, and they were really resistant to Coppola's casting choices, particularly Marlon Brando as Don Corleone.
Oh, yeah. Brando was a legend, but he also had a reputation for being difficult.
He did.
So I guess the studio saw him as a risk.
A huge risk, and they also weren't thrilled about the budget overruns or the film's lengthy runtime.
I bet.
There were even threats to replace Coppola during production.
Wow. So how did he manage to pull it off?
Well, he had a clear vision. He was strong-willed, and maybe most importantly, he had a knack for getting people on his side.
He needed that.
He convinced the studio to trust him, and in the end, he delivered a masterpiece.
And The Godfather's success really proved that these young directors could handle big budgets and deliver commercial hits without sacrificing their artistic vision.
It did. It was a turning point for the industry. It showed that audiences were hungry for something more than just escapist entertainment.
Right.
They wanted substance, they wanted complexity, and they wanted characters they could connect with on an emotional level.
So we've got these rebellious filmmakers making waves, challenging the studio system and creating some of the most iconic films of all time, but they still needed someone to champion them, someone to give them the resources and the creative freedom to bring their visions to life. That's where Bert Schneider and BBS Productions come in, right?
Exactly. Schneider was a fascinating figure, a maverick who came from a wealthy family but had a deep appreciation for art and counterculture.
Interesting.
He saw the potential in these young filmmakers and was willing to take risks that the established studios wouldn't.
So BBS became this haven for the movie brats, a place where they could experiment, push boundaries, and create films that were truly their own.
That's exactly right. BBS wasn't just a production company, it was a community, a collective of like-minded individuals who were all pushing the boundaries of cinema in their own way.
And they gave us some great films.
They did The Last Picture Show, Five Easy Pieces, and even Head, which was that surreal, psychedelic musical starring the Monkees.
Oh, wow. Head sounds like a wild ride. I bet that one ruffled a few feathers.
It certainly did. It was a far cry from the lighthearted, family-friendly fare the Monkees were known for.
Yeah, but that was the beauty of BBS. They weren't afraid to take risks, to challenge conventions, and to trust their filmmakers to follow their creative instincts. And that creative freedom led to some truly groundbreaking work.
Oh, yeah.
One film that comes to mind is The Last Picture Show, directed by Peter Bogdanovich. It was a critical and commercial success, a beautifully crafted coming-of-age story set in a dying Texas town.
The Last Picture Show was a turning point for BBS. It showed that they could produce not just edgy counterculture films, but also nuanced, character-driven dramas that could appeal to a wider audience.
It's interesting how BBS seemed to straddle both worlds, the art house and the mainstream. They were able to make films that were both commercially successful and critically acclaimed, which is a rare feat.
It's a testament to Schneider's vision and his ability to nurture talent. He gave these young filmmakers a platform, a support system, and the freedom to experiment.
So we've got the cultural upheaval, the crumbling studio system, the hungry young directors, and the maverick production company.
It's all coming together.
Now let's dive into some of the other films that defined this era, starting with MASH, Robert Altman's black comedy that took aim at the Vietnam War and sparked a national controversy.
Ash was a brilliant example of how the movie Brats used humor to tackle serious issues. It was a scathing satire of the military and the absurdity of war, but it also had a lot of heart.
And it was a huge hit despite the controversy.
It was.
Altman's filmmaking style was also revolutionary. He used overlapping dialogue, handheld cameras, and a loose improvisational approach that gave the film a sense of realism and immediacy.
Yeah, Altman was a master of ensemble filmmaking.
I can see that.
He gave his actors a lot of freedom to improvise and create their own characters, which resulted in some of the most memorable performances of the era.
And M. Ash cemented Altman's status as a major force in Hollywood. He would go on to direct a string of critically acclaimed films in the 1970s, each one pushing the boundaries of cinematic storytelling in its own unique way.
He was a true auteur, a visionary who refused to be pigeonholed.
And speaking of auteurs, we can't talk about this era without mentioning Warren Beatty. He was a movie star, a heartthrob, but he was also incredibly savvy about the business side of Hollywood.
Beatty had a real knack for finding and developing projects that were both commercially viable and artistically challenging.
He sounds like he was a force to be reckoned with.
He was instrumental in getting Bonnie and Clyde made, and he also produced and starred in Shampoo, which was a satirical look at the Hollywood lifestyle that was pretty risque for its time.
Yeah, Shampoo dealt with infidelity, sexual liberation, and the fading allure of the hippie dream, which were pretty taboo subjects in the early 70s.
Exactly. It was a sharp, witty film that captured the mood of a generation that was coming to terms with the fact that the revolution hadn't quite lived up to its promises.
It's amazing how Beatty managed to balance his star persona with his desire to make films that were both entertaining and thought-provoking.
He was a rare breed, a movie star who was also a serious artist, and he used his clout to get projects made that might not have otherwise seen the light of day.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the cultural context, the key players, the battles with the studios, and some of the groundbreaking films that emerged from this era, but there's still so much more to explore.
Definitely.
But we're going to have to save that for next time.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. Picking up where we left off last time, I think it's interesting how the movie Brats had to walk this line between artistic expression and commercial success.
Yeah, they had to make a living.
They did. They wanted to make films that matter, but they also wanted to reach a wide audience.
It's that age-old dilemma, isn't it? Art versus commerce. But these filmmakers were in this unique position to bridge that gap.
They were.
I mean, they had their fingers on the pulse of the culture. They understood what audiences were craving.
They did, and they weren't afraid to push the envelope either. Take Steven Spielberg, for example.
Spielberg, he was definitely part of that movie brat generation, but he always had this knack for crafting crowd-pleasing entertainment.
He did.
It's no wonder he's often called the master of the blockbuster.
Yeah, and it all really started with Jaws back in 1975.
That film terrified an entire generation. It redefined what a summer movie could be.
It did.
But what's so remarkable about Jaws is how Spielberg used those technical limitations to his advantage.
Oh, yeah. That mechanical shark they built.
He was a nightmare.
It was notoriously unreliable.
Yeah.
So he had to rely on suggestion on what the audience didn't see to build suspense.
Wow, that's so interesting. He created this sense of dread and anticipation by focusing on the reactions of the characters, the ominous music, the glimpses of the shark's fin slicing through the water.
Yeah.
It's a masterclass in suspense filmmaking.
It is, and that score by John Williams.
Oh, the music is iconic.
Those two notes.
You hear those notes and
that signal impending doom.
you instantly think of Jaws.
They're forever etched in our collective memory.
You're right. Spielberg really understood the power of sound and image to create this visceral cinematic experience. And he wasn't afraid to experiment with new technologies and techniques.
He was a true innovator.
His influence on Hollywood is undeniable.
He paved the way for the modern blockbuster era.
He did, but he always brought a certain level of craft and intelligence to his films that really set them apart.
He did.
I think he understood that audiences wanted to be entertained, of course.
Of course.
But they also wanted to be moved to think, to feel something.
Right.
And that's a legacy that continues to this day.
Absolutely. Another filmmaker who left an indelible mark on this era was Martin Scorsese.
Scorsese. Oh, yeah. He brought this gritty urban realism to his films that was unlike anything we'd seen before.
His films were raw, violent, and often deeply personal. He explored themes of guilt redemption and the struggle for identity in a world that felt chaotic and unforgiving.
And he found the perfect collaborator and Robert De Niro.
Oh, yeah. Their collaborations on films like Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, and Raging Bull are legendary.
Legendary. They pushed each other to their creative limits,
Yeah.
and they created some of the most unforgettable characters in cinema history.
Absolutely. Taxi Driver, in particular, is a film that continues to resonate today.
It's a classic.
It's this chilling portrait of urban alienation and the psychological toll of violence.
Scorsese's use of light and shadow, his unflinching camera work, and De Niro's haunting performance as Travis Bickle.
Yeah, just amazing.
It all adds up to a truly unforgettable cinematic experience.
It does.
It's a film that gets under your skin and stays with you long after the credits roll.
It does, but, it sparked a lot of controversy at the time. Some critics accused it of glorifying violence.
It's definitely a challenging film.
It is, for sure, but I think Scorsese's intent was to explore the darkness that exists within all of us, the potential for violence that lurks beneath the surface of even seemingly ordinary people.
Yeah, and he did so with an artistry and a psychological depth that few filmmakers could match.
Exactly. Speaking of challenging films, we can't forget about Francis Ford Coppola and Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now. It's a war film.
It is.
But it's also so much more than that.
It is so much more. It's this surreal, nightmarish journey into the heart of darkness.
A meditation on the madness of war and the fragility of the human psyche.
Exactly. And the making of Apocalypse Now is almost as legendary as the film itself.
Oh, the stories I've heard.
The production was plagued with problems. You had typhoons, drug use, Marlon Brando showing up overweight and unprepared.
Oh, wow.
It was chaos, and Coppola himself went through a kind of breakdown during filming. He pushed himself and everyone around him to their limits.
But out of that chaos, he created a masterpiece.
Yeah, he did. It's a film that defies easy categorization. It's a war epic, a psychological thriller, a visual tone poem. It's a testament to Coppola's ambition, his vision, and his willingness to risk everything for his art.
And to think that almost didn't get made.
I know it's amazing, but Apocalypse Now also marked a turning point in Hollywood,
How so?
It was a huge financial risk, and its success was far from guaranteed.
Right.
And it came in a time when the studios were starting to regain control, to pull back on the reins after years of giving these young directors free rein. The era of unbridled creative freedom was coming to an end.
So even though the Movie Brats had achieved this incredible success, there were cracks starting to show in the foundation of this new Hollywood.
Exactly. The studios had learned from their mistakes.
Yeah.
They realized that they could capitalize on the trends that the Movie Brats had set in motion, but they wanted to do it on their own terms.
They wanted the box office returns without the risk, the creative vision without the creative clashes.
Exactly. And that's where we start to see the rise of the blockbuster, the big-budget special effects-driven spectacles that would come to dominate the 80s and beyond.
So did the Movie Brats inadvertently pave the way for their own demise?
It's a complex question. They changed the game, but they also changed the rules of the game. And as we'll see next time, the studios were quick to adapt and ultimately reclaim their power.
Last time we were talking about how the studios were starting to regain control in Hollywood after kind of losing their grip for a while.
Yeah, they were taking notes, watching the Movie Brats closely, seeing what worked and what didn't.
And realizing that they could make a lot of money by following those trends.
Exactly. They saw the box office success of those more character-driven films, the ones that tackled complex themes, and they realized audiences were hungry for something different from the tired formulas they'd been relying on for so long.
Right. They wanted a piece of that action, but they also wanted to do it their way.
Of course they wanted to maintain control.
So instead of letting these young directors run wild like they had been, they started investing in bigger budget films that had the potential to reach a mass audience.
Yeah, and they also exerted more control over the whole filmmaking process from the very beginning, with script development all the way to marketing.
So that's where we really see the rise of the blockbuster.
Right.
Films like Jaws and Star Wars, they proved that audiences were hungry for spectacle and escapism.
Those films were event movies. They were experiences that you had to see on the big screen with state-of-the-art sound and special effects.
It was something totally new.
It was a far cry from the smaller, more character-driven films that the Movie Brats had been making.
But wasn't there some pushback from the Movie Brats? I mean, they'd fought so hard for creative control. Were they just going to roll over and let the studios take over again?
Well, some of them did try to adapt to this new landscape.
They had to make a living.
They did. They realized that in order to get their films made, they had to play the studio game to some extent.
So they started making compromises.
In some cases, yes, they might have agreed to tone down the violence or add a more upbeat ending to appeal to a wider audience, but others just flat out refused to compromise their vision.
And what happened to them?
They found it increasingly difficult to get their projects financed. The studios were less willing to take risks on auteur-driven films that didn't fit neatly into the blockbuster mold.
It's like this pendulum swing, right?
It is. There's definitely a cyclical nature to these things, but even though their reign was relatively short-lived, the movie brats had already made their mark. Their films had changed the landscape of Hollywood forever.
You mentioned earlier that the studios learned from their mistakes. What were some of those lessons?
Well, for one, they learned that audiences were hungry for more complex and realistic characters.
People wanted to see themselves on screen.
They did, and the studios also learned that films could tackle difficult and controversial subjects and still be commercially successful.
It was a whole new way of thinking about what a movie could be.
So even though the movie Brat's reign was relatively short-lived, they had a profound impact on the industry. They helped to usher in a new era of filmmaking. One that was more diverse, more experimental, and more attuned to the realities of the world outside of Hollywood.
And their influence is still felt today.
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the films being made today.
Yeah, we're still seeing a lot of those big-budget blockbusters, but there's also a thriving independent film scene, and streaming services are giving filmmakers more creative freedom than ever before.
That's right. And that's something the movie brats helped to make possible. They challenged the status quo, they took risks, and they inspired a whole new generation of filmmakers to do the same.
So I guess the question is, did the movie brats ultimately blow it?
I don't think so. They may have lost the battle for complete creative control, but they won the war for the hearts and minds of audiences. They left behind a body of work that continues to inspire and influence filmmakers today.
That's true, and they proved that films can be both entertaining and thought-provoking, commercially successful, and artistically ambitious.
Exactly. They showed that cinema can be a powerful force for change, a way to reflect the world around us and to challenge our perceptions of it.
It's been fascinating exploring this era of Hollywood with you,
It has been fun.
and I think we've just scratched the surface.
We have. There's so much more to discover.
To our listeners, if you haven't already, we encourage you to check out some of the classic films from this era. They're not just great movies. They're a window into a time of cultural upheaval and artistic revolution.
And they remind us that even in a system that's driven by profit, there's always room for passion, vision, and a little bit of rebellion.
That's a great takeaway. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the movie brats.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring those cinematic treasures and remember the power of film to challenge, inspire, and entertain.